for gathering here to listen to me. The turnout is already much more than I expected. And, I had that epiphany in the middle of the night today that everything that I'm talking about is too involved and I need to change everything. So if at any point I'm not very clear and you have questions, try to remember them because I'm going to be speaking fairly fast. And yeah, let's talk about how cyber war works. So the presentation this evening is going to consist of 3 parts. In the beginning, I'm going to map out the trends that govern cybersecurity today, the trends that make cyber war a very real possibility that we have to talk about in IR. I'm gonna talk about the plausible targets for cyber war and how it could go down in the part 2 of the presentation, and I'm going to wrap up with where can IR as a field of study or social sciences in general jump in helping to mitigate the risks of cyber war. So let's jump straight into it. Painting the threat landscape, the technical world in which we live today. The first trend that we need to talk about is the dropping price of computing. Over the last couple of decades, or generally since the invention of computing, the price for computers has dropped. In the picture you see a computer shipping as a magazine freebie for the first time in history. And this kind of goes to prove how much that cost has dropped. And partly this has been caused because of smartphone revolution or evolution, whichever way you choose to see it, which has resulted in significant increase in research and development funds and money into smaller, more versatile, more universal mobile computer chips. This has produced the phenomenon that we call today the Internet of Things. The cost of embedding processors and internet connectivity has dropped to this extent where it makes financial sense for manufacturers to imbue everyday mundane objects like toasters or fridges with internet connectivity and adding that smart to the name and hopefully making it somehow better. 2 other trends that we see with technology today is more users. The growth has been exponential pretty much ever since the invention of the internet or more public availability of the internet. We're nearing 4 billion people who are connected to the internet. This has produced the phenomenon of more devices being connected. These people own devices, they connect them, and the numbers are pretty staggering. Currently we have around 6.4 billion devices connected, and the projections show that we're going to have around 21 billion devices by 2020. This has caused some technical issues for the way internet works. We literally have to change the technical structure of the internet because we're running out of IP addresses to hand out to devices. So we have to update to Internet Protocol version 6. What do these trends mean for security? There are several things. We have more devices. We outsource more and more critical functions of our everyday lives to these devices, and we develop more complex systems with these devices. Now, in the industry, it's called attack surface. Think of it as a chain fence. The longer the chain fence is, the more chances there are that there's going to be some weak links in that chain fence. So, because of the growing complexity of these systems, that chain fence becomes longer, and the incentive to try and get through that fence, the incentive to try to hack these systems increases. Now, there are 2 universal laws of security. Number 1 is everything can be hacked. There are no secure systems. You just need a smart techie to put his mind to it and think about it and ask the question, what can I make this do? And chances are you're going to find one or two ways to hack it. Another law is complexity is inversely proportional to security. So this is kind of the chain link fence thing. So all of the devices that we use are powered by operating systems. Now, these operating systems, having been fairly simplistic in the past, have evolved to sort of fit more and more use cases. You have to have an operational system that supports a fridge and a toaster, and because of this growing complexity of various use cases that we can have for devices, operational systems have grown more complex and less secure as a result. As an example, Linux operational system kernel. Linux is the operational system that drives most of the world's servers, over a good half of the world's smartphones being Android devices. So the source code for the kernel has grew from 6.6 megalines of code, which is 6.6 million lines of code, all the way up to 16.9 million between 2005 and 2013. And 2013 is pretty much where IoT, Internet of Things, started. So you can see what basically you would expect, that the number of found vulnerabilities just skyrockets. It scales with the growing complexity. And another thing that doesn't help is the way that software product development currently works in the world. Developers can write up to several dozen lines of code a day, well-documented code, security audited code, and even then, security errors slip in. And quick product delivery in software development methodologies of today is always prioritized over security. Which brings us to part 2. So what does this whole technological mumbo-jumbo mean for states and for cyber warfare? As a result of pressures introduced by globalization for increased efficiency in pretty much everything, critical infrastructure of the states is increasingly more connected to the internet. Critical infrastructure is the sort of stuff disabling of which has debilitating consequences for the healthy functioning of a state. Power plants, water dams, power grid, medical, financial services. All these things are critical infrastructure. There are exhaustive lists and they're identified on a state-to-state basis. They can differ, but you can pretty much figure out that if disabling that thing, if disabling the whole mobile network of the UK is to happen, it's going to have pretty severe consequences. That's what critical infrastructure involves. Now, this fact opens the possibility of critical infrastructure being hit from anywhere. You do not have to set foot in the country to cause strategic level military damage. This is a scary thing. You would assume that these objects of critical infrastructure would be very well secured. You would assume that nuclear power plants would have very elaborate security protocols and security systems sort of implemented in place there to protect them. And you would be kind of wrong, because there's a lot of legacy stuff in that, and I'm going to expand on it a couple slides further, but just to show you what happens when you have critical infrastructure or general purpose infrastructure connected to the internet, I'm gonna provide you a couple examples. Shodan. Has everyone heard of what Shodan is? So it's basically what it says on the box. It's Google for internet connected devices. You can search for devices using Shodan. And security researchers have used this tool to great extent to find various curious things that should not be on the internet. These things include a huge variety of stuff. One researcher found a Caterpillar truck. This is a mining truck. This thing is the size of 3 tanks stacked on top of each other. The authentication was rudimentary. You could log into this thing and you could control it from the internet, from the comfort of your own home. Same researcher poked around medical. Medical should be well secured, right? Lives depend on it. Found fetal heart rate monitors on it. Found a power switch for neurosurgery ward on the open internet with rudimentary authentication. It's kind of macabre, but that sort of became my go-to metaphor for something hard. Like, you think delivering 47 slides in 30 minutes is hard? Nah. Conducting neurosurgery in the dark is hard. So yeah, all of this stuff is on the open internet. Other stuff, elementary school climate control system. You can go and make some kids uncomfortably warm. Traffic control system, implications for privacy. You can potentially hack traffic lights and cause real accidents. A crematorium, protected by a 3-character password and an old cryptographic mechanism. So pretty much no encryption at all. Bonus content, big guys mess it up too. In 2013, a couple researchers using Shodan found the building control system for Google's Sydney office. They forgot to update their security protocol, and this system at that point was basically unsecured and used a default password, which you can see on the slide was anyone's guess. Pretty scary stuff, bad stuff, and all of these things are easily exploitable if somebody with malicious intentions gets on it. So who's to blame? Thanks Obama, not quite, thanks SCADA, and this is where we get a bit more technical, but only for a brief short while. So what are SCADA? SCADA are supervisory data acquisition and control systems. These systems are what monitor sensor, information, control electronics and electromechanics, and they're basically built for controlling infrastructure, controlling industrial operations, and sort of working with these things. And SCADA systems are what drive all critical infrastructure. SCADA has problems. And the problems are because they're legacy. They're old and they're built to work and they're not necessarily secure. They use insecure hard-coded passwords. They use proprietary protocols, which brings you security through obscurity. The stuff where you have the kind of thinking, if the hacker does not know about the system because there's no information on it, he can't hack it. He can hack it, he's gonna figure it out by himself. They used to be protected by physical security. You can't get into an industrial plant and start poking with their systems. But that changed once they're hooked up on the internet. Then they're fair game for anyone with a laptop and an internet connection. They're volatile systems. They're designed to react quickly and automatically, and that causes domino effects. If you infiltrate, for example, a sensor in a nuclear power plant, you have it sending false data. There's going to be nodes in the system that are going to automatically say open valves in the cooling systems and things like that. And the system basically can self-destruct by reacting to the changes introduced to its state. And it's bad. And all of these systems are designed for particular purposes. A particular industrial plant, a particular power plant, they're going to have a system custom designed just for them, just for their purposes, for a staggering amount of money. So SCADA in cyber war is perhaps the most important type of system that we have to worry about today as IR people. A SCADA exploit, a vulnerability found in SCADA that was turned into a weapon is what is meant when people say the term cyber weapon. This is the bad stuff. This is the stuff that can hit your critical infrastructure. And yeah, critical infrastructure is a strategic target, and you don't have to hit all of the critical infrastructure at once. Critical infrastructure is built in a way where it is interdependent. You disable one kind of service, other services go down with it. Tough luck settling financial transactions without electricity. SCADA exploitations are very, very intense in terms of research and development. They're not very secure, but a lot of time and resources has to be put into developing some meaningful way to weaponize these systems and to exploit these systems to a malignant purpose. So because of that, they're thought to be reserved for governments, these sort of practices. Have we seen any SCADA exploitation attacks? We have. Stuxnet. That's the one that everyone knows about and likes to talk about it because it happened a while ago and there's a fair amount of stuff written on it. For those uninitiated, basically what Stuxnet did is attack SCADA systems that we've already just covered in Natanz nuclear facility in Iran that was responsible for enriching uranium for Iran's nuclear program. This weapon was designed to stop that nuclear program because certain actors in the world, Hind Democratistan, thought it was not a good idea to have Iran have a nuclear program. Up to this day, it is thought to be the most complex bit of malware design. It also proves that SCADA pwnage is not easy. Pwnage is also an industrial term for successful exploitation. You have to design it for that. Because those systems are ad hoc, they're for that particular facility, you cannot have universal weapons. You have to set a lot of time aside and develop it just for that one. And this just proved it. It set Iran back in their program, but it certainly didn't stall the program. And this attack was attributed to the most likely perpetrator, which was probably a United States and Israel joint op. There's a more recent thing that happened 10 months ago now. 30 power grid substations were hit in western Ukraine, essentially disabling them and disabling the flow of electricity to customers. This is a very interesting one because for the first time we had something happen that everybody was talking about in a hypothetical sense. Everyone was scaremongering about, but now it actually happened. It was a first successful attack on the power grid. It left 80,000 people without power, and that's not a great thing in Ukraine in December. You don't want that. It was also a fairly complex bit of malware for the ones involved with tech. There's a scheme here, but not the level of Stuxnet. This one used more available tools with some custom stuff, but also kind of had the level of state-level adversary. It was also attributed to the most likely perpetrator, which was Russia. So, we get to the part of IR, and this is a tough one because not all of it is immediately obvious, but there are certainly things that IR can do that do not relate to very down-to-earth technical things, although helps to understand them. And these things in short would be, of course, being more technically informed, aware, understanding how these things work, because that might help you to avoid certain mistakes that you may make in your presumptions. Now, IR can focus some of its research into adapting the international law. I'm going to speak next about this, but it's an involved situation with international law when it comes to cyber. More research is necessary, and the last point I hope is going to come up in the discussion. I'm going to intentionally not cover it, and we'll see whether you catch on to it. So, firstly, we need to talk about attribution, about legal attribution in cyber warfare. This is what cyber is ultimately all about for international relations. Attribution is about identifying perpetrators and bringing them to justice, bringing states to legal responsibility in international courts over the actions they take in cyberspace. Legal element is key here because of the way attribution takes place. So, good attribution is first step towards state responsibility. And that is pretty much what I did over summer. That's what Antona introduced me for. I tried to develop a framework looking at attribution, mapping out every step that needs to take between the attack and attributing guilt over that particular attack to a state-level actor. So there are three levels of attribution. First one is technical. So this process tries to identify the physical machine responsible for carrying out a malicious act in cyberspace. This process is highly technical. It's mostly cyber forensics, and there's not much IR can do about this except for understanding the conclusions that come out of here. And a bit of that knowledge is necessary to also appreciate the challenges that come with technical attribution. Most often, it relies on post-factum analysis. An attack has to have happened in order to investigate it. You don't investigate a crime that hasn't happened. And yeah, it relies on a lot of data where jurisdiction is concerned, where legal jurisdiction of countries is a concern, which a couple examples of that would be ISP data, sort of who that IP address belongs to, would be financial data, who paid for that particular server, that particular VPN. There are many tools to obfuscate the technical origins of an attack. There is Tor that some of you may have heard about. There are VPNs, which are basically IP tunnels. There are proxies. There are secure communication technologies, email encryption, that sort of stuff that helps you hide this. And technical attribution can range anywhere from fairly easy to nearly impossible. In state capacity, it is usually fairly impossible to sort of sufficiently attribute these attacks. This brings us to the second layer of attribution, which is human attribution. So, say technical attribution was easy, and now you have found the machine. You need to figure out who was behind that machine, who used that laptop to deliver that payload to your nuclear power plant and hack it. So this is what human attribution is all about. It relies on the classic investigative triad. Motive means opportunity. It's more of a law enforcement kind of thing. However, if good operational security was used at layer 1, no data will leak about humans. That is the key thing to understand that I often see in IR readings dealing with cyber war is it's not often got right. Yeah, and even if there was that operational security fluke, if some data leaked, if there is human identifiable data in the technical attribution investigative material, the jurisdictional boundaries stay. That's your first challenge. You still have to conduct cross-border investigations, and states will have an incentive to drag their heels in investigations if it was, Russia is not going to give up its hackers. China is not going to give up its hackers. Democratistan is not going to give up its cybercoms people. So yeah, this is tough. Which brings us to the toughest one, state-level attribution. It's about figuring out the relationship, really, between those humans and state-level organs. It's the information that you use for that attribution is never in the public domain. You have to rely on intelligence that you manage to gather. And with that intelligence, oftentimes to prove legal attribution, it would have to go through an international court, say International Court of Justice. You would have to bring your intelligence data as evidence. Now, who would want that? Who would want anyone to know what you know? States are reluctant to bring their intelligence as hard evidence in international law cases. Also, the intelligence has to be there in the first place. Some of those things are fundamentally unknowable. They're well hidden. They happen in the underground. And it's tough to know what's going on, who's working for who, and it's really not easy to figure out sort of relationships between hacker groups or humans or say humans who are working for government and the government. So yes, so in sort of the main problem here is, of course, the technical nature of cyber war and the absence of a serious international legal regime. Plausible deniability is a thing that courts in domestic level investigations have ways around. There are ways around it, possibly, in cyber warfare, but the legal basis for it is just not there yet. The international law has not caught up yet. And sort of just that's what international law looks like, really. When you start reading it, it's the first thing I found while googling clusterfuck. There's one document basically that takes all of the international law that's been drafted since World War II, and it's been drafted with kinetic warfare in mind, with the three domains, land, air, and sea in mind. And this book tries to, the experts who wrote this book try to shape the principles of international law of war and stretch them on the canvas of cyber, which is incredibly hard. And this book is written with passages like experts could not agree, some took position A, some took position B, and there are many clauses that end up like that. And this is the actual stuff that explains articles of the UN Charter to you, which is, it's not an optimal situation to be, and it adds to that state reluctance to go to international courts over cases of cyber hacking. So yes, cyber infrastructure. Basically, that's a short explanation of how the law applies. Cyber infrastructure is protected by state sovereignty. You breach state sovereignty, and it counts as either prohibited intervention or a prohibited use of force. Now, it depends which one of these two it's going to be, whether it gets classified as armed attack. Now, armed attack, it's never explained in the actual documents itself, and you have to go read secondary sources, brilliant of which is Schmidt 2012. where he explains that armed attack only applies when there is loss of human life or significant endangerment of human life. If there is loss of human life, the right that states have under UN Charter, the right to collective self-defense gets triggered. And in that capacity, they can retaliate kinetically. They can use bombs and rockets to respond to cyber war. And this is the concluding bit. This is where it gets bad, because cyber war is not reserved within the cyber domain. There's a very real mechanism where cyber war can spill over into kinetic warfare, and it's allowed under international law. And this is what IR should really focus on mitigating, on changing and shaping those principles to not allow an easy spillover, an easy cross-military domain spillover. So some conclusions. Stuff we talked about. Tech is growing with a staggering rate. More users, more devices, more complex systems, difficulties with security. We discussed one type of insecure systems, and it is not exhaustive. It doesn't have to be SCADA exploitation. It can be pretty much anything. But this is what I think is the most likely. But as we're developing new use cases for technology in our lives, in state functions, it is very likely that there are more attack vectors to come. And in the end, tech is a transdisciplinary problem. Technology has impacted in our lives that does not care about the academic boundaries between disciplines. And in essence, for IR should be informed of technology. It should think introspectively in what its part could be in solving the problem that technology has caused upon the international society.